They say the soul doesn't weigh anything. But I swear when mine left my body, the world grew impossibly heavy. My name is Sister Mary Therese. I've lived inside the convent walls of St. Gabriel's Monastery in rural Pennsylvania for nearly 3 decades. The building sits atop a hill that fog clings to like a child too afraid to let go. On cold mornings, like the one I died on, the silence in these halls feels thick enough to chew. It was a Thursday, January 9th. Breakfast had ended early, and the other sisters were already dispersing into their duties, candles to trim, psalters to sing, sins to silence. I remember standing up from the wooden bench in the refectory when the cold gripped me. Not outside, inside. It began in my fingertips. A strange, icy numbness crept up my arms, and then a sharp ringing in my ears, like the sound a TV makes when it's trying to show nothing at all. My vision narrowed into a tunnel, and then nothing. No scream, no fall, just the floor rushing up to meet me. And then stillness, complete stillness. When I opened my eyes, I was standing, but not in the refectory, and not in any place I'd ever been before. It was a garden, but not a beautiful one. Not really. The sky above was gray, not the kind that comes before a storm, but the kind that makes you question if light ever existed. The trees around me were tall, unnaturally tall, their bark black as burnt wood. Their branches reached for one another like hands that had forgotten how to hold. And the leaves, if you could call them that, whispered. Not in wind. They whispered words. Confess. Weep. Return. I should have run. Screamed. Prayed. But I stood still. Because beneath the fear, something familiar pulsed through this place, like a memory long repressed. I saw a path ahead, paved with broken stained glass. I stepped forward and heard the crunch under my bare feet, but there was no pain, just the echo of 1,000 masses spoken in Latin, looping in the background like a broken hymn. Then I saw him. He stood at the end of the path. Not the Jesus of my childhood, bearded, gentle, cloaked in light. No, this figure bled light and darkness. His robes were drenched in gold that shimmered like oil and water. His eyes were not eyes, but deep, burning voids, filled with knowing. I could not look away. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. His presence was thunder that wrapped around thought. My knees buckled. And then, for the first time in my life, I heard God speak directly. Not through scripture. Not through a priest. Not through quiet inner nudges in prayer. But with terrifying clarity. He said, "You've served me in silence. Now you will speak." I tried to respond. My mouth moved, but no sound came. I tried to say I had been faithful, that I had followed the rule, that I had lived in service. But I knew, and he knew, much of what we called obedience was just fear. And fear, he said, rots the root of truth. I felt myself being pulled backward, ripped out of that place, and hurled back toward the world of the living. As I fell, I saw something else. Not heaven. Not hell. A cathedral of wounds. Inside it were shadows dressed like priests. They drank from chalices that overflowed with oil and ash. I saw veils used to strangle and altars pulsing like open hearts. It smelled of incense and rot. And in the center, an empty crucifix, where no one hung. I hit the ground hard. Only it wasn't ground. It was the cold, blood-speckled tile of the monastery kitchen floor. Someone screamed. I don't remember who, but I was back, alive, and something had followed me. They brought me to the hospital in Lancaster. I stayed 2 nights. The doctor used words like cardiac syncope, lack of oxygen, and neurological episode. He asked if I'd been under stress. I almost laughed. I'd taken 3 vows: poverty, chastity, obedience. I hadn't held a cell phone in 15 years. I lived by a bell. I knelt in silence for hours. What stress? But I didn't tell him about the voice, or the garden, or the cathedral of wounds. I nodded, smiled, drank his weak coffee, let him think he'd saved me. He hadn't. Something else had. Back at St. Gabriel's, the sisters welcomed me like a relic returned from a pilgrimage. A miracle, they whispered. You were gone 3 minutes. 3 minutes. It felt like a lifetime. Sister Monica, the prioress, hugged me tighter than I expected. She smelled like beeswax and lavender. I wondered, for the first time, if she knew more than she let on. But it was Sister Eileen who truly looked afraid. She caught my hand as we passed each other later that day and said, "You saw something, didn't you?" I didn't answer. Her fingers trembled. She let go. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it. The cathedral. That terrible, beautiful ruin. The altar of living flesh. The chalices full of rot. And the crucifix. Empty. I lit a candle in the chapel, sat alone on the cold bench, and whispered the rosary. But the prayers came out hollow, like echoes from someone else's throat. Then I noticed the wax. The candles weren't melting. I leaned in. They flickered. They gave off light. But no heat. No scent. No smoke. They were not burning. I touched the wick. Cold. Fake. I looked up, and for a moment, I swear, I saw him again, reflected in the gold of the tabernacle door. Not fully. Just his outline. Watching. I stood so fast my spine cracked. Everything inside me screamed go. Leave. Run. Walk until the convent was just mist and memory. But I stayed. Because something deeper whispered. Look again. I did. The tabernacle glowed, but not with light. With memory. With grief. And suddenly I remembered something I had long buried. 15 years ago, a young postulant named Anna Whitaker vanished from this monastery. Disappeared without a trace. They said she left in the night. That she had a crisis of vocation. But I knew that wasn't true. I'd seen the blood under her fingernails. I'd seen the lock on her bedroom door. I hadn't spoken then. I was afraid. Obedient. Holy. But now I wondered, had she been taken to that cathedral? Had she walked the stained glass path? Had she screamed in a place no one could hear? And if so, how many others? I went to the archives the next morning. The basement room no one liked. Damp, cramped, thick with mildew and secrets. I wasn't supposed to be there alone. But I was already breaking rules. The files were in handwritten ledgers, older than my own vocation. I flipped past pages and dates and names. So many names. But then, Anna Whitaker, April 2009, removed from novitiate. No note. No explanation. Just 3 words, faintly scribbled next to her name. Return to silence. My stomach turned. And then, from behind me, a whisper, not from the door, not from a person. From the wall. It said, "She's still here." The whisper came again that night, softer this time, like a breath against my ear. "She's still here." I spun around in the archive's dim light. Nothing but damp stone walls closing in on me. St. Gabriel's Monastery was ancient, over a century old, but I never imagined the stones themselves could remember. I hurried back to my cell, but the whisper followed me. In the narrow corridors, in the shadowed corners of the chapel, even beneath the worn wooden floorboards. It was a voice without a mouth, a presence without a body. "She's still here." I didn't sleep. I sat on my cot, clutching my rosary like a lifeline, but the beads felt cold, too cold to pray. The next morning, Sister Monica noticed my pallor. "Mary Therese, you look haunted. You must rest." I forced a smile. "I'm fine, Mother." But I was not fine. The whisper had cracked something inside me, a fragile certainty I had carried like a shield. Later that day, I found myself drawn to the old chapel beneath the monastery, a place rarely used except for storage and forgotten prayers. The door creaked open. Dust danced in the shafts of light, cutting through stained glass windows, shattered long ago. At the altar stood a cracked wooden box, locked tight. I searched the room and found a heavy iron key hidden beneath loose floorboards. With trembling hands, I turned the lock. Inside was a book. Not just any book. It was a missal, but unlike any I had ever seen. The pages were yellowed with age, ink faded yet strangely vibrant. The language was Latin, yes, but interwoven with strange symbols, circles and lines that pulsed faintly, almost alive. I opened to a chapter titled De Ecclesia Vulnerata, on the Wounded Church. The text described a vision of the church not as a fortress of sanctity, but as a body bleeding from within, a living cathedral of flesh and spirit, pierced by betrayal, silence, and sin. One passage chilled me. Where the altars stand empty and the chalices overflow with ash, there the true sacrifice is forgotten, and the wounds go unhealed. I closed the book, heart pounding. Then the whisper came again, this time from inside the book itself. She's still here. A chill ran down my spine. I realized I was no longer just reading history. I was unearthing a truth someone, or something, wanted to keep buried. I knew then that the cathedral I'd seen in the garden was not a dream. It was a warning. The next morning, the weight of the missal pressed heavily in my satchel, like a stone dragging me deeper into something I couldn't yet name. I sought out Sister Monica in the refectory, her usual calm radiating like a shield. But today, her eyes flickered with something else, an unspoken warning. "Mother," I began, voice steady but urgent. "I found a book. In the chapel basement. It speaks of wounds inside the church, and a truth no one here has named." She regarded me silently for a long moment, then motioned me to follow her down the cold stone corridor to the prioress's chamber. The room was dim, heavy with incense and shadow. A crucifix hung crooked on the wall, and candles burned again, not melting, but flickering without heat. Mother Monica's voice dropped to a whisper, urgent and grave. "Mary Therese, you are stirring what was meant to sleep." I met her gaze. "What do you mean?" She sighed, pulling an old, leather-bound volume from beneath her robes. Its cover was cracked, the title rubbed away by time. "This," she said, "is the Liber Silentiae, the Book of Silence. It contains the rites and oaths of a secret order within our order. Sisters who have sworn to guard the shadows inside the church." I felt a cold shiver. "Why keep this hidden?" "Because some wounds," she said, "are too deep. Some sins, too terrible to speak aloud. Anna Whitaker was one of us, or tried to be." My heart thudded painfully. But she disappeared. Mother Monica nodded. She broke the vow of silence. She questioned the order's truths. For that, she was taken. I understood then. The cathedral of wounds, the empty crucifix, the hands reaching in the dark, they were not visions but warnings. Warnings from a church not pure, but poisoned from within. "And you?" I asked, voice trembling. "Are you part of this?" She looked away, shadows crossing her face like a veil. "We all carry the weight of silence, sister. The question is how long we can endure it." I left her chamber with the heavy certainty that my vows, poverty, chastity, obedience, were no longer shields, but shackles. The very obedience I had revered was a prison, and I was beginning to hear the call to break free, no matter the cost. That night, the monastery was quieter than ever, as if it too was holding its breath. I stood before the chapel altar, clutching the Liber Silentiae and the Missal, the weight of truth and betrayal pressing down like a storm. The flickering candles cast shadows that danced like ghosts, but still, their flames refused to burn. I whispered a prayer, not the rote words I'd known all my life, but one born from the rawness inside me. "If you are here, then show me what silence costs." And then he came. Not in light, not in glory, but in the unbearable stillness between heartbeats. His presence was a wave, both terrible and tender, washing over me, stripping away every mask, every falsehood. He said, "The church is not stone or ritual. It is flesh, wounded flesh. To live, it must bleed, yes, but also heal. You were made to speak because silence kills." I fell to my knees, the weight of years and lies crashing down. And then I saw it, the path, the garden, the cathedral. But now, the stained glass was whole again, radiant with colors I had never imagined. The altar was no longer empty. There hung the crucified one, not distant, but close, bleeding with love and sorrow. He told me, "Go back. Tear the veils. Speak the wounds aloud. Only then can the church breathe." When I opened my eyes, the chapel was empty. The candles flickered, finally melting. I knew my life would never be the same. Back in the world, I carry the message, the terrifying, liberating truth. The church I served is fragile and broken, but it can be saved. Not by silence, but by courage.